Picture this: the flickering torchlight of a medieval castle corridor, the hushed whispers of guards just around the corner, and the faintest rustle of fabric as a shadowy figure presses against the cold stone wall. This was the reality for Castle Spies, the unsung masters of deception who navigated a world where one misstep could mean imprisonment, or worse. These operatives didn't just rely on luck. They honed their craft with razor-sharp precision, turning every stone, tapestry, and fleeting moment of distraction into an opportunity. Their survival depended on a blend of audacity and ingenuity, and the tricks they employed were nothing short of extraordinary. What if you could move through a castle unseen, slipping past watchful eyes as if you were part of the shadows themselves? The spies of the Middle Ages didn't just dream it, they lived it. They transformed themselves into servants, merchants, even monks, weaving lies so convincing that suspicion never touched them. They memorized guard rotations, exploited architectural flaws, and even used the castle's own secrets against it. Some disguised themselves so thoroughly that they dined in the Great Hall mere feet from their targets, while others vanished into hidden passageways known only to a select few. Every move was a calculated risk, every breath a silent negotiation with fate. This is the world we're stepping into, a realm where wit was as vital as a sword, and survival hinged on the ability to outthink, not just outfight. Over the next few minutes, we'll unravel 20 of their most brilliant tactics, from the art of forging identities to the clever use of everyday objects as tools of espionage. These weren't just tricks, they were lifelines crafted by minds that refused to be caught. So ready yourself for a journey into the shadows, where every corner holds a secret and every whisper could be the key to freedom. The game of deception begins now. Espionage in the Middle Ages wasn't just about stealing secrets, it was about survival in a world where a single slip could topple kingdoms. Imagine the pressure these operatives faced. No radios, no surveillance tech, just their ability to blend in and outthink everyone around them. Kings and nobles relied on them for everything from uncovering assassination plots to sabotaging supply lines before a battle. A well-placed spy could turn the tide of war without a single sword being drawn. Castles, those imposing symbols of power, became the perfect stage for this shadowy dance. Their towering walls and guarded gates weren't just obstacles, they were tools. A spy who knew a castle's layout could exploit its blind spots, like the unguarded servant's entrance or the echo-prone corridors where whispers carried too far. But it wasn't just about geography. Medieval spies mastered the art of social engineering long before the term existed. They knew which guards could be bribed with a flask of wine, which scribes would gossip for a coin, and which nobles were too arrogant to notice a new face among their servants. The real genius: adaptability. A spy might arrive as a traveling minstrel one week, only to reappear months later as a merchant selling rare silks, each identity crafted to exploit the castle's vulnerabilities. And unlike today's agents, they couldn't rely on forged papers or digital disguises. Their tools were simpler but no less effective: a stolen insignia ring, a convincingly mended monk's robe, or even the strategic use of local dialects to avoid suspicion. Every detail mattered because in a world where trust was scarce, the wrong accent or an unfamiliar heraldic symbol could mean a one-way trip to the dungeon. This wasn't just cloak and dagger theatrics, it was psychological warfare. The best spies didn't just gather information, they weaponized it. A well-timed rumor about a lord's dwindling supplies could spark panic in a besieged castle. A forged letter left where the wrong eyes would find it could unravel alliances. and sometimes the mere suspicion that a spy might be lurking within the walls was enough to paralyze an enemy with paranoia. These operatives didn't just navigate the medieval world, they manipulated it, one carefully calculated deception at a time. The first trick in a Castle Spies arsenal was transformation, not just changing clothes, but becoming someone else entirely. Imagine a stranger walking through the castle gates dressed as a merchant, his pack filled with exotic spices and fabrics. To the guards, he's just another tradesman seeking profit, but beneath that unassuming cloak lies a keen observer memorizing every detail. The most effective disguises weren't theatrical, they were mundane, designed to make the wearer invisible in plain sight. A spy might spend weeks studying the speech patterns of a distant region, perfecting the slight lilt of a pilgrim's accent or the gruff slang of a blacksmith. Even the way they held a cup or adjusted their belt could betray them, so every gesture had to be rehearsed until it felt natural. Forged documents played a crucial role, especially in castles where written permits were required for entry. A spy couldn't simply scribble a fake letter. It had to bear the right wax seal, the correct flourishes of the local scribe's handwriting, even the faint smell of ink that hadn't quite dried. Some operatives went further, altering their very appearance. A patchy beard dyed with walnut husks, a wig woven from horsehair, or a carefully applied scar could turn a familiar face into a stranger. There are accounts of spies who rubbed ashes into their skin to mimic the sun-weathered look of a traveling laborer, or stained their teeth with herbs to appear older and less threatening. But the true mastery lay in psychology. A spy posing as a servant didn't just wear an apron, they adopted the hunched posture of someone who'd spent years hauling water, the calloused hands of a scullery worker, even the timid avoidance of eye contact expected of the lower class. They knew that nobility rarely noticed servants unless something went wrong, so they moved like ghosts, clearing plates or lighting candles without drawing a second glance. In one documented case, a spy spent months as a stable hand, mucking stalls and brushing horses until he overheard a critical conversation between two knights, all because no one thought to guard their words around a lowly groom. The art of disguise was more than costume. It was a performance where the smallest misstep meant disaster. A single out-of-place word, a too clean pair of boots, or an unfamiliar turn of phrase could unravel everything. Yet when done perfectly, it granted spies the ultimate weapon, the power to be everywhere and nowhere at once, listening in the shadows while the castle's secrets unfolded around them. Castles may have been fortresses, but to a skilled spy, they were more like puzzles waiting to be solved, and every corridor, every shadowed corner held a piece of the solution. While guards patrolled the main halls and gatehouses, spies moved through the castle's hidden veins, narrow spiral staircases meant for servants, storage rooms that doubled as shortcuts, even forgotten chutes once used to drop stones on attackers. The real power wasn't just knowing these routes existed, it was understanding how to use them without leaving a trace. A single misplaced footprint in the dust of an abandoned passageway could betray an entire operation. Some of the most valuable secrets were the castle's original escape routes, tunnels dug centuries earlier, often concealed behind movable panels or beneath loose floor tiles. These weren't marked on any map. Their locations were passed down orally among trusted stewards or discovered by spies through painstaking observation. There are records of operatives who posed as masons or repair workers, gaining access to blocked-off sections of the castle under the guise of maintenance, only to secretly clear debris from long-sealed tunnels. Once reopened, these passages became invisible highways, allowing spies to bypass guarded checkpoints entirely. But movement wasn't the only advantage. Visibility played an equally critical role. Ingenious spies exploited architectural quirks like thin interior walls that carried sound from chamber to chamber, or arrow slits angled just right to glimpse a lord's private meetings from the outer courtyard. Tapestries, those lavish symbols of wealth, often concealed peepholes or hollows in the stonework behind them. One account describes a spy who spent nights secretly loosening a single tapestry's mounting hooks, just enough to slip behind it during the day and listen unnoticed as war plans were debated mere feet away. The postern gate, a small, secondary entrance meant for discreet comings and goings, was another weak point spies targeted. While main gates were heavily guarded, these lesser doors were often left to the oversight of junior sentries who could be distracted by a well-timed bribe or a fabricated commotion elsewhere. In some cases, spies even manipulated the castle's own routines against it. They'd note when the changing of the guard left a brief gap in surveillance, or when the clamor of the kitchen at mealtimes drowned out the sound of a stealthy exit. Every castle had its rhythm, and the sharpest operatives learned to move between the beats, unseen and unheard. What made these tactics so effective was their simplicity. Unlike modern espionage with its high-tech gadgets, medieval spies relied on patience and perception, the kind of knowledge that came from watching a castle's patterns for weeks, noting which torches burned longest, which floorboards creaked underfoot, even which shadows lengthened at certain hours. They didn't just navigate the castle, they became part of it, as silent and unremarkable as the stones themselves. And in a world where walls were meant to keep secrets in as much as enemies out, that mastery of space often meant the difference between success and a swift, silent disappearance. Silence wasn't just a preference for castle spies, it was their lifeline. Imagine creeping down a torchlit hallway where every footfall could mean discovery, where the scrape of a boot or the jostle of a loose stone might alert a guard dozing at his post. To move undetected, spies honed their steps with the precision of a cat stalking prey. They learned to shift their weight gradually, rolling from heel to toe in one fluid motion, keeping their strides short and controlled. Some even practiced for hours on gravel or dry leaves, training their bodies to move without the faintest crunch or rustle. The best operatives could cross a room so quietly that not even the castle's dogs would stir. Bare feet were often the spy's secret weapon. Stone floors, though cold, offered better tactile feedback than shoes, letting them sense vibrations or uneven surfaces before committing their full weight. But when footwear was necessary, they opted for soft-soled slippers or fabric-wrapped soles that muffled sound. There are accounts of spies soaking their shoes in water to soften the leather, making them pliable enough to avoid squeaks. Others lined their soles with layers of felt or woven reeds, an early form of stealth technology. Timing was just as critical as technique. A spy might spend nights observing the patterns of sentries, noting when a guard paused to yawn or turned to warm his hands by a brazier. These fleeting moments of distraction became windows of opportunity. One chronicle describes an operative who timed his movements to the rhythmic clanking of the castle's water wheel, using its noise to mask his steps as he slipped past a checkpoint. But silence extended beyond footsteps. A door opened too quickly might groan on its hinges. A chest lid dropped carelessly could echo like a drum. Spies became masters of controlled motion, easing latches upward to prevent clicks, replacing objects exactly as they found them to avoid suspicion. Some carried small vials of oil to quiet squeaky hinges, while others used strips of cloth to dampen the sound of shifting furniture. Every action was deliberate, every movement calculated to leave the air undisturbed. The most skilled operatives took this further, manipulating their environment to create natural cover. A well-placed cough during a gust of wind, or the strategic rattle of a loose shutter during a storm, could disguise the sound of a picking lock. In one legendary case, a spy avoided detection by mimicking the scratching of rats in the walls whenever he needed to move. This wasn't just about avoiding noise, it was about blending into the castle's own symphony of sounds, becoming just another note in the background hum of daily life. To a spy, silence wasn't emptiness, it was a canvas, and on that canvas they painted their greatest trick of all, the illusion that they were never there at all. A dropped coin might seem like a trivial thing, unless it landed at just the right moment. Castle Spies turned everyday occurrences into carefully orchestrated tools of deception, mastering the art of distraction with a magician's finesse. While guards were trained to spot suspicious behavior, they couldn't ignore a commotion in the opposite direction. A sudden shatter of pottery near the barracks, a loudly whispered rumor about stolen wine in the cellar, even a child's ball rolling precariously close to the edge of the well. Each was a calculated move to redirect attention. The genius lay in plausibility. A distraction too dramatic would arouse suspicion, but something just disruptive enough to warrant a glance that was gold. Some operatives took this further by weaponizing the castle's own routines. A spy posing as a kitchen hand might accidentally spill a tray of empty ale mugs near the gatehouse, knowing the clatter would pull sentries away from their posts long enough for an accomplice to slip through. Others exploited human nature itself, like the documented case of a spy who waited for the castle's resident jester to begin his afternoon performance, then used the crowd's laughter to mask the sound of a picked lock. Even the weather played a role. A well-timed distraction during a thunderstorm when noise already filled the air could make a spy's movements practically undetectable. Animals became unwitting accomplices in these schemes. A spy might release a bird into the great hall during a feast, knowing the flapping wings and startled shouts would create chaos. Cats, ever present in castles for pest control, were ideal for triggering distractions. A strategically placed piece of fish could send them scrambling across a table of important documents, buying precious seconds. One account tells of a spy who trained a dog to bark at a specific spot in the courtyard, drawing guards away from a side entrance night after night until the behavior seemed natural. But the most effective distractions were social. A heated argument between two merchants near the gate could escalate just enough to demand intervention, while a flirtatious exchange between a spy and an oblivious servant might hold a guard's attention longer than intended. The key was understanding the castle's social hierarchy, knowing which disruptions would be handled by which personnel, and how long each would take to resolve. A minor scuffle among servants, a single guard might intervene. A noble's dropped cloak, half the staff would scramble to retrieve it. Timing was everything. The best spies didn't just create distractions, they choreographed them to exploit predictable reactions. A dropped weapon near the armory would send knights running, while the same act near the chapel might only merit a weary sigh. Some operatives carried small noisemakers, hollow reeds that mimicked animal sounds, or pebbles to toss onto rooftops, creating disturbances from a safe distance. Others relied on psychology, like the spy who spread rumors of a ghost in the East Wing, ensuring guards would hesitate before patrolling there after dark. What made these tactics so brilliant was their deniability. Unlike modern surveillance jammers or smoke bombs, medieval distractions left no evidence. A spilled drink, a loose chicken, or a loudly recounted tale of bandits on the road all could be dismissed as happenstance, and that was the spy's ultimate advantage, their ability to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary, making the castle's own rhythm work against it while leaving no trace of their handiwork behind. A single sheet of parchment could be more powerful than a sword in the hands of a medieval spy. Documents were the lifeblood of castle operations, passes for merchants, sealed letters from nobles, even royal decrees carried by couriers. For spies, mastering the art of forgery meant turning these everyday objects into master keys for locked doors and guarded conversations. The most skilled operatives didn't just copy handwriting, they absorbed the quirks of a scribe's style. The way certain letters slanted, the pressure of ink on vellum, even the faint smudges left by a hurried quill. One slip, one inconsistent flourish, and the game would be over. Wax seals presented another layer of challenge. A spy couldn't simply melt any candle and press a ring into it. Noble families used specific colors, deep reds for royalty, greens for landed gentry, and their seals bore intricate designs that changed subtly over generations. Some forgers worked with jewelers to carve counterfeit signet rings, while others improvised by pressing genuine seals into softened clay to create molds. There's a recorded case of a spy who stole a lord's seal by offering to clean it, then pressed it into a hidden block of beeswax while polishing the surface. The result, a perfect replica that unlocked guarded correspondence for months. But the true brilliance lay in how these forgeries were used. A spy wouldn't just flash a fake letter at the gate, they'd weave a story around it. Arriving dust-covered and breathless, claiming to be a messenger whose horse had gone lame miles back, added layers of credibility. Others posed as clerks delivering urgent revisions to banquet seating charts, gaining access to private chambers where actual invitations were stored. One notorious operative allegedly forged an entire series of letters between two rival nobles, stoking tensions until they cancelled a planned alliance, all without ever stepping foot in either castle. The most daring forgeries targeted the castle's own bureaucracy. Inventories, supply requests, even payroll records could be altered to hide a spy's presence. One account describes an operative who inserted fake names into the servant roster, allowing accomplices to pose as new hires for weeks. Others exploited the medieval equivalent of paperwork delays, presenting lost orders for wine or firewood that required them to linger in storage areas where ears could pick up valuable gossip. What made these tactics so effective was their psychological edge. In an era when few could read, the mere sight of parchment and wax conveyed authority. A guard might hesitate to question someone clutching a document stamped with a duke's seal, even if his instincts rang alarms. Spies exploited that hesitation, moving through spaces where their faces didn't belong by letting forged words vouch for them. And unlike disguises that could unravel with a single glance, a well-crafted forgery could pass scrutiny long enough to achieve its purpose, whether that meant slipping into a war council or smuggling out maps of the castle's weakest defenses. The risk, of course, was catastrophic. Discovery meant not just capture, but accusations of treason punishable by methods too grim to detail here. Yet for spies who mastered the craft, forgery was more than deception, it was alchemy. They transformed ink and wax into weapons that could topple fortresses without a single drop of blood. And in a world where trust was as fragile as the parchment it was written on, that power often proved decisive. Hiding in plain sight took on a whole new meaning with the dead drop system, a spy's ultimate safeguard against betrayal. Imagine a hollowed-out brick in the castle chapel, its interior smooth to hold a single scrap of parchment, or a loose floorboard near the armory that lifted just enough to conceal a rolled map. These weren't just hiding spots, they were invisible mailboxes designed to sever the chain of contact between operatives. A spy could deposit intelligence at dawn, and by nightfall, their accomplice might retrieve it, all without ever sharing a glance or whisper that could draw suspicion. The genius lay in the ordinary, a dead drop disguised as part of the castle's fabric, a chipped corner of a statue's pedestal, a gap behind a rusted sconce, was far less likely to be discovered than a secret meeting in the shadows. Some drops were so ingenious they defied detection for centuries. chronicles mention a spy who repurposed a disused arrow slit, plugging its exterior with a wedge of stone that matched the castle's masonry. From the outside, it blended seamlessly, but inside, a narrow cavity held messages wrapped in oilcloth to repel moisture. Others exploited the castle's own decay, like the operative who tucked notes into the hollow leg of a crumbling banquet table, knowing no servant would risk moving furniture that might splinter under their touch. Even the castle's wildlife played a role. Pigeon nests in the rafters became ideal drop points, their constant coming and going masking any human interference. The system thrived on asymmetry. One agent might leave intelligence as a merchant delivering wine, while another retrieved it weeks later posing as a scribe cataloging the cellar. Timing was orchestrated with precision. A scratch mark on a doorframe signaled a drop was active, while a missing candle from a hallway sconce warned of compromised security. In one documented case, spies used the castle's laundry system, stitching tiny messages into the hem of a noble's discarded cloak, knowing it would eventually pass through the hands of an ally in the washing yards. But dead drops weren't foolproof. A nosy servant polishing a forgotten nook or a guard's dog sniffing too intently at a loose stone could unravel everything. The smartest operatives built redundancy into their systems, maintaining multiple drops across the castle and rotating their use randomly. Some even planted decoy documents in obvious hiding spots, drawing attention away from their true caches. The risk of miscommunication was ever present. A message left too long might mold in damp conditions, or worse, be discovered by the wrong eyes. Yet when executed flawlessly, the dead drop system turned the castle itself into a silent accomplice, its very stones sheltering secrets that could topple kings. What's remarkable is how many of these hiding places endured long after their creators vanished. Renovations in medieval castles still occasionally uncover hollowed-out books with compartments for vials, or flagstones that lift to reveal compartments no wider than a hand. These aren't just historical curiosities, they're testaments to the spies' understanding of human behavior. They knew people rarely question what's always been there, and so they hid their secrets in the unremarkable, the overlooked, the parts of the castle too mundane to scrutinize. In the end, the dead drop system wasn't just about concealment, it was about psychology. The greatest trick wasn't making messages disappear, it was making everyone else forget to look. The most effective cloak wasn't made of fabric, it was woven from human indifference. While elaborate disguises had their place, the sharpest castle spies understood a fundamental truth: people rarely see what they expect to ignore. By mirroring the hunched shoulders and shuffling gait of overworked servants, these operatives turned social hierarchies into their greatest asset. Nobles trained their eyes to slide past scullery maids and stable hands, dismissing them as part of the castle's machinery rather than potential threats. A spy who mastered this vanishing act didn't need false beards or forged papers, they simply had to become part of the scenery. Consider the bread baker kneading dough near the Lord's Council chamber, her flour-dusted arms moving in steady rhythm. To the guards, she's as noteworthy as the hearthstones beneath their boots until they realize she's memorized every war plan discussed within earshot. Historical accounts describe spies who spent months perfecting these roles, studying how lower status workers held their tools, where they directed their gaze, even how they breathed during tedious tasks. One operative reportedly trained himself to blink less frequently, mimicking the exhausted stare of men who'd labored through the night. The goal wasn't to disappear, but to be unremarkable, to move through crowded halls with the same invisibility as a broom leaning against a wall. Timing played a crucial role in this psychological camouflage. Spies synchronized their movements with the castle's natural rhythms, entering rooms when servants typically did, like carrying firewood at dusk or collecting chamber pots at dawn. They avoided sudden actions that might snap them into someone's awareness, instead adopting the slow, purposeful motions of people performing mundane routines. A genuine servant wouldn't linger near important conversations, so neither would the spy. They'd scrub floors or trim candles with apparent absorption, letting gossip wash over them like background noise. The real brilliance lay in leveraging human bias. Medieval society operated on strict assumptions that laborers lacked education, that women couldn't comprehend battle strategies, that the elderly were harmless. Spies weaponized these stereotypes. A young maid humming while she polished armor might overhear troop deployments, her youth making her invisible to discussing knights. An aging gardener pruning hedges below an open window could catch whispers of treason, his stooped frame rendering him part of the landscape. Even children were occasionally employed as unwitting scouts, their games near strategic rooms dismissed as trivial. But this art demanded more than acting. It required emotional discipline. A true master of invisibility could endure insults, spilled ale, or even physical jostling without reacting, knowing any spark of pride might shatter their facade. Records mention a spy who allowed a nobleman to step on his hand during a crowded feast, never flinching as bones cracked under the man's boot. Such incidents weren't just tests of pain tolerance, they were insurance. Who would suspect the groveling fool who took abuse without complaint? What made this tactic so devastating was its simplicity. Unlike forged documents or hidden passageways, the cloak of insignificance couldn't be discovered or confiscated. It lived entirely in the minds of those who chose not to see, and in a world where attention was currency, the spies who spent it most frugally often reaped the richest rewards, walking away with secrets clutched tight in their calloused hands, while the castle's elite stared right through them without ever realizing what they'd lost. Poison was the spy's final card to play a last whisper of control when all other options vanished. Unlike the dramatic blade or the noose in the dungeon, a carefully administered toxin could erase a life with eerie subtlety, leaving no struggle, no telltale signs of foul play. For castle operatives facing capture, it offered a grim mercy, a swift exit before torture could pry loose their secrets. But in the right hands, poison wasn't just an escape. It was a weapon of precision, capable of toppling kings without a single raised sword. The most effective poisons were those that mimicked nature's cruelty. A few drops of monkshood in a rival's wine could mimic heart failure, while carefully measured nightshade might simulate a sudden fever. Spies favored substances that left minimal traces. Hemlock blurred the line between illness and assassination, and arsenic, tasteless when mixed with strong ale, could be administered over weeks to avoid suspicion. The key was patience. A target who succumbed after days of ailing drew far less scrutiny than one who dropped dead mid-banquet. One account describes a spy who posed as an apothecary's assistant, slowly increasing the dose of a noble's medicine until his death seemed like a tragic worsening of gout. But carrying poison was a double-edged dagger. A vial discovered during a routine search meant instant execution, so concealment became an art in itself. Hollow rings held single doses beneath ornate gem settings, while sealed compartments in belt buckles or prayer beads kept toxins dry and undetectable. Some operatives even soaked threads in poison, weaving them into the hems of their clothing, a last resort measure to bite down on if captured. The risks were horrifyingly real. A cracked vial could mean accidental death, and an improperly sealed container might leak during a frantic escape, turning the spy's own body against them. The psychological toll was equally devastating. Unlike blades that demanded a moment of decisive violence, poison required cold calculation, watching a target sip tainted wine, pretending concern as their health declined. Historical records hint at operatives who abandoned the tactic after their first use, unable to stomach the intimate cruelty of it. Yet for some, poison's very subtlety made it indispensable. A well-placed death could destabilize a castle without a whisper of conspiracy, leaving factions to blame each other while the true orchestrator slipped away. Perhaps the most chilling aspect was how poison exploited trust. A spy might spend months ingratiating themselves as a loyal cupbearer or healer, only to weaponize that very intimacy. In one notorious case, an operative delayed her mission for a year, waiting until her target, a paranoid duke, finally allowed her to sample his meals first. The day he let his guard down, she switched vials. The lesson was clear. In the shadow war of castle espionage, even trust could be distilled into a lethal dose. What set poison apart wasn't just its lethality, but its silence. Where swords sparked rebellions and forged martyrs, poison left only questions. A dead lord might prompt succession chaos, but without proof of murder, allies hesitated to act. Rumors festered, alliances fractured, and spies vanished into the chaos they'd created, leaving behind not a smoking gun, but an empty cup and a castle too busy doubting itself to chase ghosts. In the end, the greatest power of poison wasn't death. It was the paralysis of uncertainty, the way it turned every meal, every sip, into a potential act of war. A storm-battered cloak, a limp exaggerated just enough to wince at, and a tale of misfortune spun with just the right details. These were the tools of the lost traveler, a role perfected by castle spies who traded stealth for sympathy. Unlike elaborate disguises that required weeks of preparation, this ruse thrived on immediacy. A spy would arrive at the gates as darkness fell, perhaps with a dirt-streaked face and a story of bandits on the road or a collapsed bridge miles back. The key was plausibility. A tale too dramatic, like a dragon attack, would raise eyebrows, but a merchant separated from his caravan during a downpour. That was relatable enough to unlock both doors and guards' tongues. Timing was everything. Arriving at mealtime meant servants were too busy to scrutinize, while an approach during a storm guaranteed the castle's inhabitants were more focused on their own comfort than a stranger's origins. Spies studied regional dialects and current events to craft airtight backstories. Mentioning a real village recently plagued by floods or a highway known for robberies added layers of credibility. Some even carried proof, a forged letter from a fictional lord requesting aid, or a pouch of deliberately low-quality coins to sell their penniless traveler act. Once inside, the spy's performance shifted. Oversharing was a common mistake, so the smartest operatives let their hosts fill the silence. A grateful nod when offered broth, a weary sigh while mending a sprained ankle. These small gestures built trust without demanding it. In one documented case, a spy posing as an injured pilgrim spent 2 days in the castle infirmary, listening as monks debated politics mere feet from his cot. By the time he recovered, he'd memorized troop movements scribbled on the healer's notes. The genius of this ruse lay in its natural exit strategy. Unlike spies who had to vanish mysteriously, the lost traveler was expected to leave. A pre-dawn departure with murmured thanks avoided farewell scrutiny, and a promise to send gratitude from one's home village, which of course didn't exist, left hosts feeling charitable rather than suspicious. Some operatives even left behind trivial gifts, a clumsily carved wooden token or a promise of prayers, to further cement their harmless image, but the risk was palpable. In smaller castles where everyone knew each other's faces, a stranger stood out like a crow among doves. The most successful spies used this to their advantage, leaning into their outsider status to ask naive questions about castle routines or defenses. Where might a traveler take shelter if the gates close suddenly? Sounded innocent enough, but the answer revealed emergency protocols. Even a seemingly casual comment, your baker's bread is finer than Lord Talbot's. Could confirm a noble's whereabouts if the guard corrected. Lord Talbot hasn't visited in months. What made this tactic so enduring was its humanity. Castles weren't just fortresses, they were communities bound by codes of hospitality. Exploiting that kindness required a spy to walk a razor's edge, convincing enough to avoid suspicion, but forgettable enough that no one would chase them once they continued their journey. And in the shadows between gratitude and betrayal, secrets flowed as freely as the wine shared with a supposed stranger at the hearth. Gold wasn't just currency in the shadowy world of Castle Espionage. It was a skeleton key that could unlock even the most tightly guarded doors. But the true masters of deception knew that bribes weren't always about coins clinking in a pouch. Sometimes the most valuable leverage wasn't wealth, but fear. A guard with gambling debts might trade patrol schedules for a fraction of what he owed. A chambermaid hiding an illegitimate child could be persuaded to leave a certain window unlatched after hearing a carefully crafted rumor about the local priest's loose tongue. Spies didn't just target greed, they hunted vulnerability, and in a castle teeming with secrets, everyone had at least one. The art of bribery lay in its subtlety. A clumsy offer of payment would alert even the dullest sentry, so spies perfected the dance of implication. A merchant overpaying for a guard's family heirloom, a traveler insisting a servant keep the extra wine after a friendly chat. These exchanges built rapport before the real negotiation began. Historical accounts describe operatives who posed as debt collectors or distant relatives, weaving elaborate backstories to explain sudden generosity. One notorious spy allegedly befriended a castle scribe by funding his daughter's dowry, only to later request copies of private correspondence as a sentimental favor. Blackmail, however, was the sharper blade, and it required surgical precision. A spy might spend weeks gathering harmless gossip before finding the one thread that unraveled a life. A knight's drunken boast about cheating in a tournament became lethal leverage when paired with the right audience. Even the castle's chaplain wasn't immune. Records mention a spy who intercepted confession notes detailing a noble's heresy, using them to turn the holy man into an informant. The most effective blackmail wasn't an outright threat, but a veiled suggestion, a passing comment about how unfortunate it would be if certain rumors reached the wrong ears, delivered with a smile over shared ale. Timing transformed these tactics from crude coercion to psychological artistry. A bribe offered during harvest season, when castle wages often lagged, carried more weight than one proposed after a generous bonus. Blackmail worked best when the target had something imminent to lose, a pending marriage alliance, an upcoming inheritance hearing. One chronicle tells of a spy who waited until the eve of a squire's knighthood ceremony to reveal knowledge of his stolen valor, ensuring compliance during the castle's most vulnerable hour. But the real brilliance lay in escalation. Smart operatives started small, requesting trivial favors to test loyalty before demanding greater risks. A guard who once accepted silver to look the other way during a midnight stroll might later ignore missing documents or even smuggle weapons. The transition from paid ally to trapped accomplice was gradual, like quicksand, and once someone crossed that line, there was no going back. A truth spies exploited ruthlessly. The risk, of course, was mutual destruction. A blackmail target pushed too far might confess to their lord preemptively, or worse, set a trap. The shrewdest operatives always kept deniability, using intermediaries, unsigned notes, or coded phrases that sounded innocent to eavesdroppers. In one legendary case, a spy convinced a corrupt steward he was working for a powerful bishop, using forged seals and scripture quotes to maintain the ruse until the castle's grain stores were thoroughly sabotaged. What made these tactics so devastating was their invisibility. where disguises could be unmasked and hidden passages discovered. Bribes and blackmail left no physical trace. A guard's sudden wealth might raise eyebrows, but without proof, accusations were dangerous, and the victim of blackmail, they'd rarely speak up, knowing the spy's exposure meant their own ruin. In the end, these weren't just tricks, they were traps that turned the castle's own people against it, creating cracks in the foundation long before the walls ever trembled. Moonlight could be a spy's greatest ally or their deadliest betrayer. While darkness provided cover, it also brought unpredictable challenges. A cloud revealing your silhouette at the wrong moment, a loose stone clattering louder in the quiet, or the sudden glow of a patrolling guard's lantern cutting through the black like a blade. The smartest operatives didn't just rely on Nightfall, they manipulated it. They memorized the lunar calendar, planning infiltrations during the moon's waning phases when shadows stretched longest. On cloudy nights, they moved like ghosts between the torch sconces, timing their steps to coincide with the hiss of dying embers. But true mastery came from understanding the castle's nocturnal rhythms, the way sentries slowed their pace after midnight, or how the scullery's drafty corridors muffled sound when the kitchen fires burned low. One of the most daring nighttime tricks involved exploiting the guard's own vision. Spies carried small, polished metal discs to reflect sudden bursts of light, flashing them across a courtyard to startle sentries into turning away, or mimicking the flicker of a distant torch to create false movement. Others used the castle's architecture against itself, slipping through the zigzag shadows of crenellated walls or clinging to the pitch-black sides of towers where moonlight couldn't reach. There's an account of an operative who hid in a castle's chapel bell tower for 3 nights, observing the exact minute when the watch changed and the eastern parapet stood empty for 12 breaths, just long enough to cross. Curfews meant to lock down castles after dark often backfired, becoming tools for spies instead of obstacles. A shrewd operative might bribe the night gatekeeper to forget to secure a postern door, or exploit the chaos of late-night arrivals like the spy who slipped in disguised as a drunken guest, staggering through the gates with a group of real revelers. Some even used the curfew's strictness to their advantage. In castles where servants were confined to quarters after dark, a spy posing as a guard could move freely, knowing anyone else abroad would be too terrified of punishment to question him. But the most audacious nighttime infiltrations relied on psychology. Spies knew fear magnified every sound. A creaking floorboard became a footstep. A rat scuttle turned into an intruder's approach. One legendary operative would scratch at doors with a twig to draw guards away from their posts, then double back through the now undefended area. Others exploited the universal human tendency to overlook the familiar. A spy draped in a hanging tapestry might freeze as a guard passed, trusting that the mind dismisses what it sees every day. The deadliest hours weren't midnight but the false dawn, that murky interval when exhausted guards ached for their shift to end and early risers hadn't yet stirred. It was then that the best spies made their moves, vanishing into the thinning dark as the castle yawned itself awake, leaving no trace but the whispers of what might have been. Trust was the most fragile weapon in a spy's arsenal, and the double agent wielded it like a master sculptor chiseling marble. To convince an enemy you'd abandoned your cause required more than just lies. It demanded a performance so flawless that even your own allies might question where your heart truly lay. The best double agents didn't merely feed misinformation, they became living conduits of doubt, dripping just enough truth into their betrayals to make the poison palatable. A castle's lord might receive secret battle plans smuggled by a turncoat knight, unaware that those plans were outdated, or that the knight's trembling confession of loyalty had been rehearsed for weeks in a hidden cellar. The genius of this gambit lay in its asymmetry. A double agent didn't just mislead, they exploited the enemy's hunger for validation. A spy, defecting after a public humiliation, like a flogging or a stolen inheritance, sold their story with the grit of genuine resentment. Historical records describe one operative who allowed himself to be caught stealing from his own lord's treasury, then escaped to the rival castle with a tale of vengeance, only to later redirect their army into an ambush. The most convincing traitors weren't those who arrived with grandiose promises, but those who let their new masters uncover their allegiance through staged slips, a tearful prayer in the wrong dialect, a drunken muttering about unfair treatment. But the real art was in the details. A double agent's false intelligence had to be credible enough to pass scrutiny, yet damaging enough to matter. Revealing a minor supply route's location might buy trust, but only if the route was already abandoned. Some operatives seeded truths with lethal omissions, confirming a castle's weak northern wall, but failing to mention the hidden pits dug before it. Others weaponized timing, like the spy who reluctantly disclosed an impending attack, knowing the warning would arrive too late to prevent it, but just in time to exhaust the defenders on a false alarm. The psychological toll was immense. Playing both sides meant living in perpetual limbo, where a single misplaced word could unravel years of work. Double agents often cultivated real relationships with their enemies, breaking bread with them, mourning their losses only to later manipulate those bonds. Chronicles tell of one operative who attended the funeral of a guard he'd befriended, all while knowing his intelligence had caused the man's death. The line between performance and reality blurred dangerously. Some spies reportedly struggled to remember which loyalties were feigned and which were genuine. Yet when executed perfectly, the double agent Gambit didn't just mislead, it paralyzed. A lord who doubted his own advisors would hesitate at every decision. Alliances crumbled under the weight of suspicion, and battle plans were rewritten until they became useless. And the greatest triumph, when the enemy's distrust outlived the spy's presence, leaving them to second-guess every ally long after the operative had vanished into the night. In the end, the double agent's legacy wasn't just the chaos they sowed, it was the lingering question they planted in every mind. If even the most loyal could betray, who could ever be trusted again? A courier riding through the castle gates with a satchel of letters was as unremarkable as the morning sunlight, and that was precisely why spies cherished the role. To the guards, these messengers were human parchment weights, barely worth a second glance as they delivered merchant invoices or birthday greetings from distant relatives. But in the right hands, that innocuous leather pouch could hold more secrets than a locked vault. The genius of the courier disguise lay in its beautiful simplicity. Unlike a noble sudden visitor or a suspiciously well-dressed merchant, a messenger was expected to come and go quickly, often bypassing the deeper scrutiny given to longer-term guests. Some operatives took this further by weaponizing tedium. They'd memorize the exact routes and schedules of real couriers, then slip into the rotation with forged credentials. A spy might arrive just after the weekly grain report delivery, knowing guards would be too bored by routine to question another rider in dusty clothes. Others exploited the castle's own bureaucracy, presenting missent letters that required them to linger near the scribe's quarters, or fragile packages that necessitated careful handling and plenty of time alone in storage rooms. Historical records mention one particularly bold operative who posed as a royal courier for months, using his access to plant false documents in the castle's own archives. The real artistry, though, lay in the messages themselves. A seemingly dull letter about crop yields might conceal battle plans written in lemon juice between the lines, visible only when heated. Others used the medieval equivalent of a cipher, innocuous phrases like, "Your cousin's black mare has foaled," could signal troop movements to those who knew the code. Some spies even stitched tiny maps into the linings of messenger pouches or carved micro-sized notes into the wax seals themselves, the most daring trick. Hollowing out the wooden cylinders used to carry scrolls, creating hidden compartments that wouldn't betray their contents even if the outer seal was broken. But the courier's greatest power wasn't just transporting secrets, it was gathering them. A messenger could ask seemingly naive questions about road conditions or weather patterns, gleaning intelligence from offhand guard chatter. They'd note which towers had fresh torch smoke indicating increased patrols, or which nobles were receiving urgent correspondence hinting at shifting alliances. One account describes a spy who accidentally spilled his inkwell near the castle's garrison, using the chaos to count swords being sharpened while servants helped clean the mess. What made this tactic so enduring was its deniability. Unlike a forged identity that might unravel under scrutiny, a courier's role was ephemeral. By the time anyone thought to question that quiet rider who passed through last Tuesday, he'd already melted into the landscape, leaving nothing but ordinary letters and the faintest whisper of suspicion in his wake. And in a world where trust traveled as slowly as the horses that carried it, that was often more than enough. A thin silk rope coiled tightly inside a belt buckle might not look like much, but for a cornered castle spy, it was the difference between freedom and a dungeon's iron embrace. These weren't the thick, cumbersome ropes used to lower drawbridges. They were marvels of medieval ingenuity, woven from flax or horse hair to bear a person's weight while remaining slender enough to hide in plain sight. Some operatives stitched them into cloak linings, their threads doubling as decorative embroidery until pulled free in a heartbeat. Others braided them into hair, disguising escape tools as elaborate courtly styles. The most audacious even hollowed out prayer beads, threading the rope through what appeared to be pious jewelry, but carrying the rope was only half the battle. Spies studied castle exteriors with the eye of a sculptor examining marble, noting every crack, vine, and protruding stone that could serve as an impromptu anchor. A weathered gargoyle's outstretched wing, a forgotten mason's hook left embedded in the mortar, these became lifelines in a crisis. Historical accounts describe one operative who escaped by tying off to a rain gutter, its iron brackets groaning but holding long enough for him to vanish into the moat's reeds. Another slid down a tower using nothing but a tapestry's hanging rod, its wood splintering under his weight just as his boots touched the ground. The true test came in the execution. A rope flung too carelessly might snag on arrow slits, while a hasty knot could unravel mid-descent. Experienced spies practiced their escapes in daylight, memorizing the exact number of hand-over-hand motions needed to reach safety. Some coated their ropes in beeswax to silence them against stone, or dyed them to blend with ivy at night. There's even a tale of a resourceful operative who used his rope to rappel straight through a garderobe chute the castle's latrine shaft, emerging foul but free while pursuers gagged above. What made these slender threads so indispensable was their versatility. A rope could be a lifeline, a distraction, or even a weapon. One spy allegedly strung his between two trees to trip pursuing horsemen, while another used it to lower stolen documents from a high window. And when all else failed, a well-placed knot around a door's interior bar could delay pursuers just long enough for the spy to melt into the countryside. In the end, the escape rope wasn't just a tool, it was the physical manifestation of a spy's most vital principle. Always leave yourself an out, even if it's nothing more than a thread's width of hope. A noble's cry for help was like a key turning in the castle's lock. Few guards dared refuse entry to someone draped in fine silks and reeking of privilege, even if their story had holes. The distressed noble act was a masterclass in social engineering. exploiting the medieval world's unshakable deference to rank. Unlike commoners who might be grilled at the gates, a lord claiming to have been ambushed by bandits or separated from his hunting party was ushered straight to the hearth, his every whim catered to while he quietly mapped the castle's vulnerabilities. The costume alone wasn't enough. A spy playing noble had to embody the role from the inside out, the way they flicked imaginary dust from their sleeve, the barely concealed impatience at being offered second-best wine, even the way they sighed while recounting their misfortune. Historical accounts describe operatives who spent months studying noble households to perfect these nuances. One spy reportedly trained with a fencing master not to fight, but to adopt the distinctive posture of someone accustomed to wearing a sword as jewelry. Another learned to sneeze into a perfumed handkerchief with the delicate disdain of aristocracy. Every mannerism, from the tilt of a chin to the dismissive wave of a hand, had to scream entitlement. Backstories were crafted with equal precision. A vague tale of highwaymen might pass at a rural outpost, but castle guards expected details. The shrewdest spies wove their fictions from threads of truth, mentioning real noble families from distant regions or referencing actual highway closures due to storms. Some even carried stolen signet rings, their designs copied from heraldry books but deliberately damaged to explain why they didn't quite match any known house. The goal wasn't to withstand deep scrutiny, but to avoid triggering it in the first place. After all, who'd risk a lord's wrath by implying he was lying? Once inside, the spy's privileges multiplied. A noble guest would be invited to private dinners where battle plans were discussed over roasted pheasant. Their servants, often accomplices, might be sent to air out bedchambers conveniently located near the lord's private solar. There's a documented case of an operative who, after feigning a sprained ankle, was carried to a tower room with a perfect view of the castle's troop deployments, all while being plied with sympathy and spiced wine. But the act's brilliance lay in its natural exit strategy. Unlike other disguises requiring elaborate vanishings, a distressed noble was expected to depart once messengers, more spies, arrived with fresh horses and coin. A grand gesture like gifting a host with a replacement for his supposedly stolen dagger could cement the ruse long after departure. And by the time anyone thought to verify the noble's identity, the spy would be leagues away, leaving behind nothing but a lingering question. Had they just entertained a victim of misfortune or the architect of their own undoing? A lifted eyebrow, a hand resting too long on a dagger's hilt, the deliberate way a goblet was set down, these were the invisible ink of medieval espionage. In castles where every whisper might echo back to the wrong ears, spies perfected the art of silent conversation through gestures so ordinary they defied suspicion. A servant adjusting his cap could signal a change in guard rotations. A lady's fan, fluttering in a seemingly idle pattern, might warn of approaching danger. These weren't just random motions, they were a lexicon of survival, where every tilt of the head or fold of the arms carried weight. The most effective systems thrived on ambiguity. A spy scratching his nose could mean anything unless you knew he always did it twice before a critical message. Some operatives paired gestures with contextual cues, like touching a specific finger to a wine cup only when standing near a certain tapestry. Historical accounts describe networks where a dropped handkerchief signaled abort, while tugging an earlobe meant proceed as planned. The brilliance lay in the gesture's dual nature, meaningless to observers, thunderously clear to initiates. One chronicle tells of a spy who avoided capture by accidentally knocking over a salt cellar, a prearranged sign that sent his allies scattering before guards even arrived. Training was exhaustive. Spies drilled until their signals became second nature, blending seamlessly with habitual motions. A cough covering a hand gesture, a stretch disguising a pointed finger. Every action had to feel unrehearsed. The best operatives took this further, tailoring their systems to their covers. A blacksmith might communicate through hammer taps, while a scribe could use the flourish of his quill. There's even a tale of a spy who passed intelligence by how he tied his shoelaces, varying the knots to indicate different threats. Crowded spaces became their stage. In banquet halls thick with laughter and clattering plates, a spy could converse freely. A toast raised with the pinky extended might identify a fellow operative, while swirling a wine cup clockwise could mark a target. Some used the castle's own rituals against it, like the operative who hid messages in the elaborate hand-washing ceremonies before feasts, where specific finger movements went unnoticed amid the pageantry. The true mastery, though, lay in adaptability. When a gesture was compromised, spies could shift entire systems overnight. A snapped fan might replace a scratched chin, or a new code might emerge based on how bread was broken at meals. This fluidity made the language of gestures nearly impossible to crack, because by the time an enemy noticed the pattern, it had already evaporated like mist over the moat. And in that fleeting, wordless exchange, entire plots unfolded, alliances formed, and castles trembled on foundations they never knew were crumbling. Fear was the most contagious weapon in a Castle Spy's arsenal, and the cleverest operatives knew how to weaponize it without drawing a single blade. The false panic wasn't just about lying, it was about orchestrating chaos so precisely that the castle's own defenses turned against itself. Picture this: a breathless scout stumbles into the courtyard at dusk, gasping about enemy torches spotted in the eastern woods. Guards scramble to reinforce the gatehouse. The Lord barricades himself in his chambers, and in that frenzy of misplaced vigilance, a shadow slips into the treasury unnoticed. The genius wasn't in the rumor itself, but in its timing. A whispered warning of plague might empty the kitchens just as poison was being slipped into the stew. A fabricated sighting of siege engines could send archers racing to the wrong wall, leaving the postern gate vulnerable. The most effective false alarms exploited genuine vulnerabilities. A spy might spread word of a coming storm to convince stewards to move grain stores indoors, exposing hidden tunnels in the process. Others preyed on superstition, like the operative who planted rumors of a cursed well, knowing servants would avoid it long enough for him to retrieve hidden documents from its depths. Historical accounts describe spies who staged entire performances. A wounded rider collapsing at the gates with tales of approaching armies, his bandages hiding stolen maps as physicians rushed to aid him. The key was plausibility. A panic too dramatic, like a dragon attack, would be dismissed, but a claim that the castle's water supply had been sabotaged. That warranted immediate action. Timing transformed these deceptions from distractions into opportunities. A false alarm during changing of the guard created maximum confusion, as replacements arrived before their predecessors had fully briefed them. Holidays and feasts were prime targets. When wine loosened tongues might spread rumors faster than truth. One chronicle tells of a spy who triggered chaos by releasing a single pig painted with demonic symbols during a harvest festival. The ensuing uproar allowed him to steal 3 chests of silver while the clergy debated exorcisms. But the real artistry lay in escalation. A master of the false panic didn't just shout fire and flee. They let the lie grow organically. A servant might overhear 2 guards speculating about bandits, then confirm it to the kitchen staff with added details. By nightfall, the entire castle would be barricading windows against an attack that existed only in whispers. The shrewdest operatives even planted conflicting rumors, suggesting an assault would come from both north and south, splitting defenses so thinly that every gate became vulnerable. The brilliance of this tactic was its self-destructing nature. Unlike forged documents or stolen uniforms, a false panic left no physical evidence. By the time the Lord realized no enemies approached, the spy had vanished along with whatever prize they'd sought. And in the aftermath, as guards stood down and servants sheepishly returned to their posts, the castle was left with something far more damaging than a missing relic, a lingering doubt. If today's alarm was false, how could they ever be certain the next one wasn't real? That erosion of trust, that hesitation in the face of future warnings, was the spy's most enduring victory, a crack in the castle's confidence no mortar could ever repair. A dagger no longer than a finger might seem insignificant until it's the only thing standing between a spy and a locked door or a tightening noose. Unlike the flashy swords brandished by knights, these hidden blades were tools of quiet desperation, designed to slip past notice until the moment they were needed most. Concealment was an art form. Some operatives stitched narrow sheaths into the linings of their boots, where a blade could lie flat against the shin without hindering movement. Others favored the hollow spines of prayer books, their lethal contents disguised as pious devotion. There's even an account of a spy who embedded a thin stiletto in the handle of a hairbrush, its needle-like point camouflaged among bristles. But these weren't weapons for glory, they were instruments of last resort. A hidden blade's true value lay in its versatility. The same slim dagger that could sever ropes binding a prisoner's wrists might also jimmy a stubborn window latch or carve a makeshift key from scrap wood. Some spies honed the edges to razor sharpness, not for combat, but to slice through parchment-thin gaps in barred doors. One chronicle describes an operative who used his blade to pry loose a dungeon's mortar, brick by brick, over weeks of moonlit labor. The goal was never to fight unless absolutely necessary. It was to vanish before steel ever needed to be drawn. Ingenuity flourished in the details. Blades were often dulled on one edge to prevent accidental cuts while hidden, yet tapered to a needlepoint for precision work. Handles might be wrapped in plain leather to avoid telltale glints of ornamentation. The most cunning designs folded or telescoped, collapsing into objects as innocuous as a writing quill or a pilgrim's badge. There's a legendary tale of a spy who carried a blade disguised as a rosary's crucifix, the crossbar twisting free to reveal a 2-inch sliver of tempered steel. The true test came in the execution. Drawing a hidden blade required misdirection, a cough masking the snick of metal, or a stumble that let a hand dip into a boot unnoticed. Even then, timing was everything. A guard might overlook a noblewoman adjusting her sleeve, but catch the glint of steel if she moved too fast. The best operatives practiced retrieval until it became reflex, able to palm a blade mid-conversation without breaking eye contact. What made these tiny weapons so formidable wasn't their size, but their secrecy. A castle's guards would strip a prisoner of obvious arms, but who'd think to confiscate a monk's breviary or a merchant's belt buckle. And in that moment of oversight, a spy could turn the mundane into salvation, one careful cut at a time. The hidden blade wasn't just a tool, it was the embodiment of a spy's creed. Survive first, fight only if you must, and leave your enemies wondering how you slipped away yet again. The moment a spy felt the weight of suspicion settling over them, the real game began, not with frantic denials, but with a performance so bold it could turn accusation into chaos. The loyalty test dodge wasn't just about lying. It was about rewriting the entire interrogation into a spectacle of wounded honor. Picture a castle's dimly lit chamber where an operative, cornered but calm, suddenly slammed his fist onto the table, demanding to know why his years of faithful service were being questioned by some upstart captain. The brilliance lay in the reversal. Instead of defending themselves, they attacked, casting their accuser as the real threat, a jealous rival, perhaps, or even a traitor sowing discord. Timing was everything. A spy wouldn't wait for the third round of questioning to play this card. They'd strike at the first hint of doubt when the interrogator's confidence was still fragile. Historical accounts describe operatives who turned their interrogations into theatrical displays of indignation, ripping open their tunics to reveal old battle scars earned in loyal service, or spitting curses at the cowardice of those who dare question them. One notorious case involved a spy who burst into tears, accusing his captors of playing into an enemy lord's hands by persecuting his most devoted men. The stunned silence that followed gave him just enough time to vanish before anyone recovered. The tactic thrived on exploiting divisions. In castles where factions jockeyed for power, a well-placed insinuation could ignite smoldering rivalries. A spy might sigh that of course the northern guards would distrust him hadn't their commander always resented the king's favor. Others weaponized piety, asking aloud why their faith was being tested by men who skipped mass. The shrewdest operatives tailored their outrage to their audience. A mercenary, wronged by accusations, might theatrically toss his pay pouch at his accuser's feet, while a nobleman's spy would demand trial by combat, knowing the social cost of refusing him. But the real mastery lay in escalation. A cornered operative wouldn't just deny stealing documents. They'd counter that the real thief must be the clerk who'd been alone in the archives yesterday. By shifting focus, they transformed from suspect to investigator, buying days or even weeks as their accusers chased false leads. There's a chilling account of a spy who so thoroughly convinced his captors of his innocence that they let him help interrogate others, including the very allies who'd smuggled him into the castle. The risk, of course, was overplaying the hand. Too much fury seemed staged, too little rang hollow. The best performances balanced calculated rage with just enough vulnerability, a crack in the voice when recalling past sacrifices, or a trembling hand clutching a family talisman. And when done perfectly, the loyalty test dodge didn't just save the spy, it left the castle's own ranks fractured, with guards eyeing each other long after the interrogation ended. In the end, the greatest trick wasn't escaping suspicion, it was ensuring that whoever survived the ensuing witch hunt would never again trust their own judgment. The dead man's switch was the ultimate gamble, a spy's final insurance policy written in secrets rather than ink. Imagine a captured operative smiling faintly as his interrogators threatened torture, whispering, "Kill me, and by morning, every lord in the kingdom will know about your daughter's treasonous letters." This wasn't just a bluff, it was a meticulously orchestrated threat designed to turn the captor's own castle into a prison for them both. The genius lay in its asymmetry. A spy might arrange for an ally to mail incriminating documents if they missed a weekly meeting at a tavern. Or perhaps a coded message would be scratched onto a church's donation ledger, visible only to a fellow operative posing as a priest. The message was clear: harm me, and your own secrets become everyone's. But setting this trap required cold calculation. Spies couldn't rely on vague threats. Their dead man's switch had to be specific, verifiable, and painful enough to outweigh the captor's desire for revenge. Historical records describe an operative who'd hidden proof of a lord's bastard child in 3 separate locations, each set to be revealed by different triggers: a missing payment to a scribe, an unlit candle in a certain window, even the absence of a particular flower on a grave. The more convoluted the mechanism, the harder it was to dismantle under duress. Some spies went further, embedding their switches in everyday routines, like the agent who instructed his laundress to burn his special shirt if he didn't collect it by Friday, its ashes revealing a hidden compartment holding blackmail material when sifted. The psychological warfare was brutal. Captors faced an impossible choice: execute the spy and risk political ruin, or keep them alive and endure their slow manipulation. There's a chilling account of a duke who discovered his prisoner had rigged a confession to be read aloud in the town square upon his death. The document named accomplices, some real, some innocent, ensuring the duke would face either a rebellion or a wave of wrongful executions. The switch didn't just protect the spy, it paralyzed their enemy with dilemmas no sword could solve. Yet the dead man's switch was a double-edged dagger. If discovered prematurely, it could accelerate a spy's demise rather than prevent it. Operatives learned to layer their threats, ensuring even a revealed switch had contingencies. One notorious case involved a spy who accidentally let his captors find a single compromising letter, only for them to later realize it referenced a second, deadlier cache set to release if the first was tampered with. The lesson in the shadow game of Castle Espionage: sometimes the best armor was making your enemy fear the very act of striking you down. What made this tactic so devastating wasn't just its lethality, it was the lingering dread it planted. Long after the spy was freed or forgotten, their captors would flinch at every unexpected knock, wondering if this was the moment their own secrets would come tumbling out. Because the dead man's switch didn't just save lives, it turned trust into a weapon, ensuring that even in defeat, the spy's whisper could still echo through the halls of power. The world of medieval spies was a relentless chessboard where every move carried life or death stakes, and their survival depended on outthinking rather than overpowering their enemies. What's astonishing isn't just the audacity of their tricks, it's how timeless they remain. Take the art of dead drops, those hidden caches for passing secrets. Today's intelligence agencies still use the same principle, swapping hollowed-out bricks for digital dead drops in encrypted servers. Or consider the loyalty test dodge, where a cornered spy turns accusations into chaos. Modern interrogators train to spot this very tactic, proving that human psychology hasn't evolved nearly as fast as our technology. The parallels don't stop there. Medieval spies weaponized distractions with the precision of a stage magician, flashing light, spreading rumors, exploiting routine. Sound familiar? It's the same playbook used in cyber warfare today, where a well-timed phishing email or a fabricated social media trend can divert attention from a real attack. Even the distressed noble act has its contemporary counterpart in honeypot operations, where agents construct elaborate false identities to infiltrate high-security circles. The tools may have changed, but the game remains eerily similar. What truly set these operatives apart was their ability to see the castle not as an impenetrable fortress, but as a living organism with weaknesses to exploit. They knew that the strongest walls were useless if a guard could be bribed, a servant overlooked, or a lock picked with a hairpin. That mindset, the relentless search for the overlooked flaw, is what connects a medieval spy scaling a moonlit parapet to a modern operative hacking a secure network. Both understand that systems are only as strong as their most complacent link. Perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in their adaptability. Without satellites or wiretaps, medieval spies turned everyday objects into tools, hiding messages in loafers, forging seals with candle wax, even using the castle's own gossip as intelligence. That resourcefulness is the heart of espionage. Whether you're smuggling a map in a prayer book or a microchip in a pen, the goal has always been the same: to see what others miss, to move unseen, and to turn the enemy's certainty against them. So the next time you hear about a high-tech spy gadget or a daring modern infiltration, remember, the blueprint was drawn centuries ago, in candlelit corridors by operatives who had nothing but their wits and a knife strapped to their thigh. Their legacy isn't just in the tricks they invented, but in the stark reminder that the most powerful weapon in espionage has always been, and will always be, the human mind. Now, over to you. Which of these ancient tactics do you think would still work flawlessly today? Drop your thoughts below, and if you've enjoyed this journey into the shadows, hit like and subscribe for more stories where history's cunning meets the present's intrigue. The past is full of secrets waiting to be uncovered, and we're just getting started.